In the drought-stricken frontier town of Red Mesa, a grieving widow was about to raise her hand at a courthouse auction. What started as a 10-cent bid on worthless land took a shocking turn when she came face to face with fresh chisel marks on a well that should have been untouched for 8 years. Nora Winslow wasn't your typical auction bidder. For over a decade, she had spent her life alongside her husband engineering irrigation systems across the Southwest Territories. Known for her precision with pressure calculations and her refusal to accept convenient lies. When she purchased the dry well for 10 cents and discovered damp silt where none should exist, she had no idea she was walking into a conspiracy worth $63 million. Nora descended into that abandoned shaft with her late husband's surveying equipment, uncovering evidence that would lead to a confrontation with the most powerful men in the territory, men who had already killed to keep their secret buried. What began as a widow's quiet act of defiance would become a battle for truth that flooded the desert with justice. The town of Red Mesa would never be the same after the night Nora Winslow turned a stolen aquifer into a weapon and watched a fortune in lithium-white water rise from the ground like vindication made visible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't buy a well that day. I bought the key to every lie this town was built on. The courthouse steps burned under the August sun, the kind of heat that turns stone into griddle iron and makes men's collars wilt before noon. I stood at the back of the crowd while the auctioneer's voice cracked through the dry air, calling lots that nobody wanted. Abandoned claims, foreclosed dreams, the debris of drought, lot 17, water well, designation Southwest 42, 3 miles northeast of town limits, showing dry for 8 years. Opening bid $1, silence. The men in their dusty suits shifted weight from boot to boot. Someone coughed. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, 50 cents. More silence. A few heads turned looking for fools, 25 cents then. Anyone? I raised my hand. The crowd rippled with snickers. Low and mean. The kind of laughter that's been following me since Thomas died. Since I stood in front of the town council and called his damn collapse what it was. Murder dressed as engineering failure. Sold to the widow Winslow for 10 cents, the auctioneer said, not bothering to hide his smirk. Title transfers immediately. I paid my dime and took the deed. The paper was thin as hope, but it was legal. Mine. As I turned to leave, Deputy Rafe Hollander touched the brim of his hat. All politeness and warning. Congratulations. Mrs. Winslow, fine piece of property. Thank you, Deputy. Course. Dry wells can be dangerous. Cave-ins, rattlesnakes, trespassers. His smile didn't reach his eyes. A woman alone ought to be careful about going out there. I'm a civil engineer, Mr. Hollander. Careful is what I do. His jaw tightened just slightly. That's what worries me. I walked past him, the deed folded in my pocket like a secret. Behind me, I heard men muttering about women with more pride than sense, about Thomas's widow who couldn't let sleeping dogs lie. Let them mutter. They didn't see what I saw. They never did. The well sat on a stretch of hardpan 3 miles out, where the desert started winning its war against civilization. Creosote and sage stubbled the ground, and the horizon shimmered with heat ghosts that made the distant mesas float and waver. I rode Juniper out there that first afternoon. She's a scar-notched Mustang with a temperament like mine, stubborn, suspicious, and unwilling to quit. When I bought her from a traveling trader, he warned me she'd been mistreated, that she might never trust anyone. We understood each other perfectly. The well's stone collar rose from the earth like a broken tooth, its wooden frame tilted eastward as if trying to escape. I dismounted and walked the perimeter, my boots crunching on ground that hadn't known rain in months. But something was wrong with the picture. Fresh chisel marks scored the stone rim, deep, deliberate gouges that couldn't be more than weeks old. Someone had been working here recently and not for maintenance. The marks were too precise, too purposeful. I knelt and ran my fingers along the cuts. Cold stone, hot air. and underneath both, a faint vibration that pulsed through the ground like a distant heartbeat. No dry well should have a heartbeat. I peered into the shaft. Darkness swallowed the light after 20 feet, but the air rising from below carried something unexpected, the faint mineral smell of dampness. Not the stagnant reek of trapped rainwater, but fresh, cool, moving. Under a thin layer of dust at the shaft's edge, I found it. Damp silt, the kind that forms when water seeps and evaporates, leaving minerals behind. I scraped a sample of the chalky white scale into a vial from my kit and pocketed it. The sun was dropping when Juniper's ears swiveled. Hoofbeats. Deputy Hollander rode up slow, his badge catching the dying light. He dismounted with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Just checking titles, he said, though we both knew that was a lie. Making sure everything's in order. Everything's perfectly legal, Deputy. Oh, I'm sure it is. He walked around the well, his eyes scanning the ground, looking for what I'd found. The water syndicate doesn't like surprises, Mrs. Winslow. They've worked hard to bring order to this territory, to make sure water flows where it's needed most, to make sure it flows where they profit most, you mean? His smile sharpened. Careful words for a woman alone on empty land. Are you threatening me, Mr. Hollander? Warning you. There's a difference. He mounted his horse, looking down at me with something that might have been regret. Your husband was a good man, brilliant engineer, but he got confused about who his enemies were. He knew exactly who they were, did he? Rafe touched his hat brim. Then maybe ask yourself why he's dead and they're not. He rode off, leaving me alone with Juniper and the well and the questions that had been eating at me for 6 months. That night, back in my room above the apothecary, I couldn't sleep. The desert wind carried sounds through my open window, the usual chorus of coyotes and nightbirds. But underneath, if I listened carefully, I could hear it, a low, metallic thrum, rhythmic, mechanical, coming from the direction of my 10-cent well. Midnight found me back at the well with Thomas's old surveying kit strapped across my back. The moon was a silver coin in the sky, bright enough to cast shadows, but not bright enough to be seen from town. I'd learned to work in darkness. After Thomas died, darkness became my laboratory. I set up the percussion sounder, his invention, refined from mining equipment he'd studied back east. A weighted hammer that I could lower into shafts, striking the walls at measured intervals. The echoes would tell me what the stone was hiding. The lantern went down first, suspended on a rope I'd tested 3 times. 20 feet, 30, at 40 feet it illuminated the shaft walls, and my breath caught iron anchor studs. New ones, sunk into the stone at precise intervals, their edges still showing tool marks from recent installation. They were mounting points for machinery that no longer hung there, or machinery that had been carefully removed. I secured my rope and lowered the sounder. The first tap echoed normally. The second rang hollow, wrong. The sound didn't dissipate the way it should have. It traveled sideways, east, into space that shouldn't exist. I mapped it carefully the way Thomas had taught me. Tap. Listen. Calculate. Tap, listen, calculate. The well wasn't just a well. It was a gateway to something larger, a side gallery that branched off beyond the main shaft. Hidden, deliberate, and completely absent from any survey or map. I'd ever seen. I pulled the sounder up and lowered myself carefully into the shaft, boots finding purchase on the new anchor studs. They held my weight perfectly. Someone had installed climbing infrastructure and then tried to hide it. At 30 feet down, I found it. A weep fracture in the stone, barely visible. Water trickled through, not downward but sideways, disappearing into a crack that my lantern couldn't fully illuminate. I scraped at the mineral deposit around the fracture, white, greasy, not like any clay or limestone I'd encountered. I collected several grains in a vial, my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the electric certainty that I was holding something that mattered. Below me, deeper in the shaft, I heard it. The faint rhythmic sound of pumps, not constant, periodic, like a heartbeat that only woke when it thought. No one was listening. The sound synced with tremors I could feel. Through the stone, vibrations that traveled up through the anchor. Studs and into my bones, someone was moving water. A lot of water, and they were doing it in secret through infrastructure that officially didn't exist. I climbed higher, examining the anchor studs more carefully. One was loose. When I worked it free, something fell. A small tin tag that had been trapped behind the mounting plate. I caught it and held it to the lantern light. M&M Pump CO. Red Mesa Syndicate. The tag was stamped, official, recent. Proof that the syndicate had been operating equipment in this supposedly abandoned well. Above ground, Juniper snorted. Not her usual sound. A warning. I climbed fast, hand over hand, and pulled myself up into the cool night air. Juniper stood rigid, ears pinned back, staring into the darkness beyond the well. Coyotes yipped from the ridge. Not hunting calls. Alarm calls. Something had disturbed them. Or someone. I gathered my equipment quickly, pocketed the tag and the sample vials, and mounted Juniper. She didn't need urging. We moved fast across the hardpan, taking an indirect route back to town. As we crested the first rise, I looked back. In the moonlight, I could just make out a figure on horseback near the well, standing still. Watching the direction I'd gone, the distance was too great to identify them, but I didn't need to. I knew that posture. That careful, calculating stillness. Rafe Hollander, the deputy who'd warned me to stay away, was keeping watch over the very well he claimed was worthless. Back in my room, I spread Thomas's old journals across the bed. His handwriting, precise and familiar, filled pages with calculations and concerns. In the margins of his last survey notes, written 3 days before the dam collapse, I found an entry I'd missed before. Subsurface flow patterns don't match surface hydrology. Water is being diverted before it reaches the municipal reservoir. Check Southwest 42 and adjacent properties. Flow belongs to those who steward it, not those who steal it. Southwest 42, my well. Thomas had known. He'd been investigating the same thing I just discovered. And then the dam failed, and they called it faulty engineering, and I became the hysterical widow who couldn't accept that brilliant men sometimes made mistakes. Except Thomas never made mistakes. Not with load calculations. Not with water. I held the tin tag up to the lamplight. The syndicate's mark. Clear as confession. I needed 2 things. A laboratory to analyze what I'd found, and someone I could trust not to run to Rafe Hollander the moment I showed them proof. In Red Mesa, that narrowed my options to exactly one person. Dr. Abigail Thorne's surgery smelled like ether and carbolic acid, and the peculiar bitterness of dark secrets kept sterile. I found her at dawn, before patients started arriving, bent over a microscope in the back room that doubled as her laboratory. Mrs. Winslow. She didn't look up from the slide. If you're here for laudanum to help you sleep, I'm going to disappoint you. I need a chemist, not a prescription. That got her attention. Abigail straightened, removing her spectacles. She was 40, hawk-faced, brilliant in the way that made men nervous and other women grateful. Harvard-trained, Boston-born, and rumored to have left the East after performing a procedure that saved a woman's life but violated someone's moral code. We'd never been friends, but we recognized each other as women who'd chosen competence over comfort. "Show me," she said. I laid out the vials. The water sample. The white greasy grains. The tin tag. Abigail picked up the tag first, turning it in the light. "Where did you get this?" "From a well that's been dry for 8 years. Except it's not dry. And it's not abandoned." Her eyes sharpened. "The well you bought. For 10 cents. And yet here you are with syndicate equipment tags and mineral samples that someone clearly wanted hidden." She selected a vial and moved to her workbench. "Let's see what they're hiding." The tests took an hour. Abigail worked with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that carelessness kills. She boiled samples, added reagents, watched reactions with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. The water sample fizzed violently when she added acid. High mineral content, unusual salinity for groundwater. The white grains were more interesting. When she heated them, they burned with a crimson-pink flame. "Lithium," Abigail said quietly. "Lithium carbonate, most likely, mixed with other salts. In a water well? In brine from a deep aquifer." She looked at me over her spectacles. "Do you know what lithium is worth, Nora?" I did. Thomas had mentioned it in his journals. The new electric batteries, medical applications, chemical processes. White gold, some were calling it in the technical journals from Europe. And you're saying there's lithium beneath Red Mesa. I'm saying there's lithium-rich brine beneath your property. And based on the infrastructure you described, someone's been extracting it secretly while telling everyone the aquifer is dry. Abigail cleaned her instruments with sharp, angry movements. They're not just stealing water, Nora. They're stealing a fortune. She moved to a drawer and pulled out a folder thick with newspaper clippings. Articles about the syndicate's water relief, works, public contracts for reservoir management, testimonials from grateful farmers about emergency water, deliveries, all signed by Silas. Maddock, he controls the narrative, Abigail said. The syndicate presents itself as the savior of Red Mesa. Meanwhile, they're siphoning an underground lake and mining its minerals, and killing anyone who gets too close to proving it. Abigail's hand stilled. Your husband. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The dam collapse wasn't accidental. Thomas was investigating water theft. He'd identified the well sites. He was about to file a complaint with the Territorial Water Commission, and then his dam failed during routine inspection, and everyone called it pride before the fall. Abigail's voice was bitter. I treated 3 men who were there that day. None of them could explain how the supports gave way so completely, so suddenly. A knock at the surgery door made us both freeze. Abigail moved quickly, gathering the samples and sliding them into a locked cabinet. I pocketed the tin tag. The door opened to reveal a woman in an elegant traveling dress, her dark hair pinned in a style that said money and Eastern education. She was younger than me, perhaps 25, with eyes that missed nothing. Dr. Thorne, I apologize for the early hour. I wondered if you had any headache powders. Of course, Miss Maddock. One moment, Maddock. My blood went cold. Clara Maddock, Silas's daughter, the one who'd left for Boston years ago and supposedly wanted nothing to do with her father's business. Clara's eyes met mine, just for a moment. Then she looked away, examining the bottles on Abigail's shelves with polite interest. But I'd seen it, the tension in her shoulders when Abigail said, lithium. The way her jaw had tightened, she'd been listening. She'd heard everything. Abigail prepared the powder with professional calm, but I could see the warning in the set of her spine. We'd been discovered. The question was whether Clara would run straight to her father. Thank you, Doctor. Clara paid and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mrs. Winslow, isn't it? I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband's work on irrigation systems was quite brilliant. My father spoke of him often. The words were perfectly polite, perfectly venomous, but as Clara passed me, I felt something slide into my pocket, light as a whisper. I waited until she was gone, until the sound of her carriage faded before pulling it out. A calling card. Expensive stock, engraved, on the back in precise handwriting, Madame Dubois Dressmakers. 2 p.m. Abigail and I stared at each other. It's a trap, I said, or it's an ally. Abigail locked the cabinet with a definitive click. Either way, you need to know which. Because if Silas Maddock's daughter is willing to meet you in secret, that means something inside that family is already broken. She was right. And if Clara knew about the lithium, about the wells, about what her father had done, she might be the only person with access to the evidence I needed, the kind of evidence that could bring down the entire syndicate, or get me killed trying. Madame Dubois kept her shop on the respectable end of Main Street, where the awnings were clean and the windows displayed French fabrics that most Red Mesa women could only dream of affording. I arrived at 2 o'clock exactly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside, the air was thick with lavender sachets and the whisper of silk. Clara Maddock stood before a mirror, a bolt of midnight blue fabric draped across her shoulder. She met my eyes in the reflection. Mrs. Winslow, how fortunate. I was hoping for a second opinion on this color. Madame Dubois, a shrewd Frenchwoman who'd survived 3 husbands and 2 territories, read the situation instantly. I will check the back room for the matching trim. Take your time, ladies. The moment she disappeared, Clara's elegant composure cracked. She moved to the window, watching the street. We have perhaps 10 minutes before someone notices we're both here. Her voice was low, urgent. My father has men who watch me. Not constantly, but often enough. Why are you helping me? Clara's laugh was bitter. Helping you? I'm trying to save what's left of my conscience. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded paper. This is a sketch of the conduit system beneath Red Mesa. Not complete. My father keeps the full plans in his private office, but enough to show you the scope. I unfolded it carefully. Lines and numbers, junction points, pressure valves. An underground maze that spidered out from a central pumping station north of the Maddock estate. The sketch showed diversion tunnels that intercepted water before it reached the public wells, siphoning it to private reservoirs and processing facilities. How long has this been operating? 12 years. Since before I left for Boston. Clara's hands trembled slightly. I thought it was just water management. Conservation. My father always said the syndicate was saving Red Mesa from drought. But when I came back last month, I found the lithium contracts, the export ledgers, the payments to... She stopped, swallowing hard. The payments to men who make problems disappear. Like my husband, Clara's silence was answer enough. I studied the map, my engineer's mind cataloguing weak points and vulnerabilities. This central pump house. Can you get me inside? She pulled a brass key from her pocket. This opens the northern gate. But Nora, Mrs. Winslow, they will destroy everything if they suspect you're getting close. My father has contingency plans. Explosives placed in the main galleries. If threatened, he'll collapse the entire system, rather than let it be exposed, destroying the aquifer in the process. He calls it sterilizing the asset. The disgust in her voice was genuine. Better no one has it than lose control of it. The bell above the door chimed. Clara's face went smooth and pleasant as Rafe Hollander stepped inside, his badge catching the light from the window. Miss Maddock, Mrs. Winslow, what a pleasant surprise. Deputy. Clara's smile was perfect, practiced. I was just admiring Mrs. Winslow's opinion on this fabric, I'm sure. Rafe's eyes moved between us, calculating. Mrs. Winslow, I'd be happy to escort you back to your lodgings. These streets can be unsafe for a woman alone. It wasn't a request. I folded the sketch and tucked it into my pocket before he could see. How thoughtful, Deputy. Outside, Rafe walked close enough that his arm brushed mine. Not threatening, not quite. Just present. Inescapable. You're an intelligent woman, Nora. Too intelligent to throw your life away chasing ghosts? Is that what you think my husband was chasing? Ghosts. I think Thomas was a brilliant engineer who forgot that knowledge, without power, is just noise. Rafe stopped, turning to face me. The syndicate controls the water because someone has to. Because without order, without management, this territory dries up and blows away. Is that system perfect? No, but it works. It keeps people alive, by stealing from them, by prioritizing, by making hard choices that soft-hearted people can't stomach. His voice was almost gentle. Your husband couldn't accept that. He thought virtue and truth would trump necessity. And now he's dead, and the water still flows, and Red Mesa still survives. You sound like you admired him. I did. Rafe's jaw tightened. That's why I'm trying to save you from his mistakes. Walk away, Nora. Take your 10-cent well and forget what you've seen. I'll even make sure you get fair compensation. $1,000, enough to start over somewhere else. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that the desert has a way of swallowing people who don't know when to stop digging. He touched his hat and walked away, leaving me standing in the dust with Clara's map burning like fire in my pocket. That night I met Abigail in her surgery after dark. We spread Clara's sketch across the examination table, and I traced the route with my finger. The pump house is here. 2 miles north of town. If we can document what's inside, the equipment, the logs, the flow records, we'll have proof of the theft." Abigail studied the map with clinical precision. "And Clara gave you the key?" "Yes. Why would Silas Maddox's daughter betray her own father?" It was the question I'd been asking myself. Maybe she's like us, someone who chose conscience over comfort. Or maybe it's a trap. Abigail looked at me. "But we're going anyway, aren't we?" "Tomorrow, before dawn. Before anyone expects us to be awake, much less foolish." Abigail smiled. It was the kind of smile I imagine surgeons wear before cutting into something they know will hurt. "Then I suggest we get some sleep. We'll need our wits sharp for this particular surgery." The pre-dawn darkness was absolute. No moon, just stars scattered across the sky like thrown dice. Juniper carried me and my equipment north while Abigail followed on her grey mare, both of us moving quiet as ghosts across the hardpan. The pump house crouched low against a mesa's base, half hidden by creosote and false mesquite. Stone walls. Heavy door. No lights visible, but I could hear the low thrum of machinery, feel the vibration through the ground. Someone was running the pumps at night. When no one was supposed to be watching, Clara's brass key turned smooth in the lock. The door swung open on oiled hinges, revealing a cave mouth of darkness that smelled of grease and wet stone. I lit a shielded lantern. The interior came into view like a mechanical heart exposed. Pressure gauges clustered on the walls, brass valves gleaming, leather drive belts running to pumps that descended into darkness. In the corner, a desk held ledgers and schedules. Abigail moved to the desk immediately, opening the topmost ledger. Pumping schedules. Night operations only. "Look at these flow rates. They're pulling thousands of gallons per hour." I studied the pressure gauges. The main line showed high draw, but two smaller gauges were marked with codes instead of locations. They're using coded designations, hiding where the water's actually going. Smart. Abigail photographed pages with a small camera she'd brought, the flash powder making brief lightning in the enclosed space. But not smart enough. "Look at this. Sector SW42, diversion complete, lithia processing initiated. SW42, that's your well designation." My heart hammered. Here was proof, written in the syndicate's own hand. A bell clanged somewhere outside. Sharp, urgent. Abigail and I froze. Voices, multiple men. "Getting closer. The morning maintenance crew," I whispered. We should have had another hour. But there was no time for should-haves. I grabbed the most recent ledger while Abigail stuffed her camera into her medical bag. Then I saw it, a metal grate in the floor, partially hidden beneath a workbench. I pulled it aside, revealing a narrow crawlway that breathed cold air. The access tunnel Clara mentioned. "It leads to the main galleries." "Nora, we can't." "You can't. I can." I handed her the ledger. "Get this to safety. When the crew comes in, tell them you were called for a medical emergency. A worker with appendicitis. They'll believe a doctor. And you? I'm going to see exactly what they're hiding down there." The voices were at the door now. Keys rattling, Abigail gripped my arm once, hard, then moved to the entrance with her medical bag and her rehearsed emergency face. I dropped into the crawlway and pulled the grate back over my head just as the door opened. Dr. Thorne. "What in blazes? Thank God you're here. One of your men collapsed at my surgery an hour ago. Acute abdominal pain. I need to operate immediately, but I need help moving him." The distraction bought me seconds. I crawled fast, the lantern barely illuminating the tight passage. The walls were mortared stone, slick with condensation. Every few feet, I passed junction points where smaller tunnels branched off. The main gallery opened suddenly, and I nearly tumbled into empty space. I caught myself on a timber support and looked down. A cathedral of stone and water stretched below me. Massive, ancient. The aquifer itself, glittering in my lantern light like a subterranean lake. Pumps lined the shore, their intake pipes disappearing into the dark water. And along the far wall, white crusts, lithium carbonate deposits thick as frost. This was the heart of it. The fortune Silas Maddox had been stealing for 12 years. But what made my blood freeze wasn't the water or the lithium. It was the wooden crates stacked along the gallery's main supports. Stenciled in red, danger, dynamite. Clara had been right. Maddock had rigged his own operation for demolition. If threatened, he'd bring the ceiling down and flood the tunnels, destroying the evidence and anyone inside. I needed photographs, measurements, proof that would survive even if this place didn't. Behind me, footsteps echoed in the crawlway. Someone was coming. I moved fast, documenting what I could see, sketching the layout with shaking hands. The gallery extended northeast toward my well. This was the connection, the tunnel that explained everything. The footsteps were closer now. A lantern beam swept the crawlway behind me. I grabbed my evidence and retreated deeper into the gallery, looking for another exit. The pump's rhythm was deafening here, drowning out everything except the pounding of my heart. A side passage, narrow, barely visible. I squeezed through, praying it led up and out rather than down, and trapped 50 feet of crawling through darkness. Then fresh air. I emerged behind a stand of juniper, a quarter-mile from the pump house, covered in mud and breathing hard. In the distance, I could see Abigail riding away with 2 of the crew. Playing her role perfectly, I had the evidence, the maps, the knowledge. Now I needed to make people listen. The town meeting hall was packed to suffocation. Every seat filled, men standing along the walls, faces tight with the worry that drought brings. I stood at the back, clutching my documents, watching Silas Maddock work the room like a conductor leading an orchestra. He was 60, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that cost more than most men earned in a year. When he spoke, his voice carried the warm authority of a concerned father. My friends, I understand your fears. Another dry year, another season of rationing. But the Red Mesa Water Syndicate has not been idle. He gestured to a large map behind him, showing proposed reservoirs and relief works. With your continued trust, we will bring water to every homestead, every farm. We will not let this territory die of thirst. Applause. Desperate, hopeful applause. I stepped forward. Mr. Maddock, may I ask a question? The room went quiet. Heads turned. I felt their stares like brands. Silas's smile never wavered. Of course, Mrs. Winslow, we welcome all voices. I walked to the front, laying my documents on the table. Where exactly is this water coming from? Because according to the pumping logs from your northern facility, you've been extracting thousands of gallons per hour from an aquifer you claim is depleted. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Silas's smile tightened by a fraction. Those are operational records, Mrs. Winslow. Water management requires complex infrastructure. I'm afraid the technical details would be difficult for most citizens to understand. I'm a civil engineer, Mr. Maddock. I understand them perfectly. I unfolded Clara's map. This shows your diversion tunnels. They intercept water before it reaches public wells, siphoning it to private reservoirs. You're not managing the aquifer. You're stealing from it, the room erupted. Angry voices, denials. Rafe Hollander stepped forward, raising his hands for calm. Now Mrs. Winslow makes serious accusations, Rafe said smoothly. But accusations require proof that can withstand scrutiny. Silas pulled papers from his own case. I have territorial permits for every facility, signed by the Water Commission. Everything we do is legal, transparent, and in the public interest. He distributed copies to the crowd. Mrs. Winslow lost her husband in a tragic accident. Her grief has perhaps clouded her judgment. My husband was murdered because he discovered what you're doing. That's a slanderous claim. Silas's voice hardened. And without evidence, it's nothing but the hysteria of a widow who cannot accept that talented men sometimes make fatal mistakes. I wanted to scream, to overturn the table, to force them to see, but Rafe was already herding people toward the exits, his voice calm and reasonable. I think we've heard enough for tonight. Let cooler heads prevail. The crowd dispersed, muttering. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, none with belief. I'd brought facts to a theater of lies, and the performance had beaten me. Outside, Clara materialized from the shadows. She pressed something into my hand, a sealed envelope, then disappeared into the crowd before I could speak. Back in my room, I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, a single sheet of paper with an address, and a note in Clara's precise handwriting, original contracts. His private safe. Open only if cornered. The moon was dark when Abigail and I returned to the pump house. This time, we brought juniper and tools for breaking locks. The brass key Clara had given me wouldn't be enough for the private office Silas maintained on site. "This is insanity," Abigail whispered as I worked the lockpicks Thomas had taught me to use. "If we're caught, then we're no worse off than we already are." The lock clicked open. "After you, Doctor." The office was sparse. A desk, filing cabinets, and a floor safe that made my heart sink. I'd learned to pick door locks, not safes, but Abigail knelt beside it, ear pressed to the metal. My father was a banker. Before he decided I should be decorative instead of employed, he taught me a few things. She worked the dial with surgeon's fingers. Minutes passed like hours. Then click, the safe door swung open. Inside, leather-bound contracts yellowed with age. I pulled them out carefully, reading by lamplight. The syndicate's founding documents. Dated 1876. My hands shook. But the town charter is dated 1877. Silas claimed water rights before Red Mesa legally existed. He registered the aquifer as private property under a shell company, then used that to... "The headgate," I said, pulling them both up. "On the Mesa Rim northeast. There's an old flood control structure from the first settlements. If we can reach it, if we can open it, we can redirect the pressure." Abigail understood immediately. "Force the water through the syndicate's tunnels instead of up through your well. The galleries will implode inward. Crush their equipment but vent the aquifer back to the surface through multiple points." I looked at Clara. "Your father built a theft machine. I'm going to turn it into a distribution system." "The tunnels aren't designed for that kind of pressure," Clara said. "They'll collapse." That's exactly the point. Thunder rolled overhead. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke, rain starting to fall in fat, heavy drops. In the desert, this was either salvation or devastation. There was no middle ground. We rode hard toward the mesa, taking the narrow trail that miners had cut decades ago. Behind us, I could hear Silas rallying his men, screaming about containment and damage control, but he didn't understand what I'd seen in those galleries. The wooden support beams, the mortared stone, the way the whole system was essentially a house of cards, held together by careful pressure management and the hubris of men who thought they could control geology. The headgate was ancient, crusted with rust and calcified mineral deposits. A massive wheel valve that probably hadn't been turned in 20 years. Clara and Abigail threw their weight against it, while I descended back into my well. The anchor studs I'd found weeks ago became my ladder now. I climbed down into the cold spray, into the darkness, feeling for the bypass valve Clara had mentioned. It was there, hidden behind a false wall panel, the emergency release that the syndicate had installed to prevent pressure. Spikes from destroying their pumps. I was about to use it to do exactly that. My fingers found the wheel. Rusted shut. I braced my feet and pulled with everything I had. The valve shrieked, protesting, then suddenly gave way. Water roared past me with the fury of something imprisoned too long. The force was tremendous, pushing me against the shaft wall. I climbed fast, hand over hand, as the pressure built below. Above me, through the well opening, I saw Rafe on horseback. He wasn't pointing his gun at me. He was pointing it at 3 of Maddox's men who'd been trying to reach the headgate. "Stay back," Rafe shouted over the rising wind. "This ends now." One of the men raised a rifle. Rafe fired first, not to kill, but to warn. The shot kicked up dust at the man's feet. Then Silas appeared, his face twisted with rage. He had his own pistol drawn, and it was aimed not at Rafe, but at Clara, who stood vulnerable at the headgate with Abigail. "You ungrateful—" Rafe moved, fast, throwing himself between Silas and his daughter just as the gun went off. The bullet caught Rafe in the side. He went down hard but didn't let go of his own pistol. Clara turned the wheel. I screamed from the well shaft. She and Abigail heaved together. The headgate wheel turned, grudgingly at first, then faster, until water from the canyon reservoir poured into the ancient flood channels that connected directly to the syndicate's tunnel network. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Underground, The galleries couldn't handle the combined pressure of the breached aquifer and the flood from above. I felt it through the stone, a series of deep, resonant cracks. Not explosions, implosions. The tunnels collapsing inward on themselves, crushing the pumps, the pipes, the stolen infrastructure. And then, at my well, something magnificent happened. The water found every weakness, every fissure, every hole that Maddox's men had drilled over 12 years of secret operations. It burst through in a dozen places, geysers erupting from the desert floor, like the earth was exhaling truth. At my well, the original breach point, the geyser rose highest, 20 feet into the air, catching the stormlight, white with suspended lithium carbonate, mineral-rich, undeniable, beautiful in its raw power. The ground buckled beneath Silas's feet. His horse reared and he was thrown, hitting the ground hard. When he tried to stand, the earth beneath him cracked open, a sinkhole where one of his main tunnels had collapsed. He didn't fall in, but he froze there, stranded on an island of solid ground, surrounded by the destruction his greed had created. Rafe managed to stand, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. He walked slowly toward Silas, his badge catching the light from the geysers. "Silas Maddox," Rafe said, his voice carrying despite the wind and water. "You're under arrest for murder, fraud, and theft of territorial resources." For the first time since I'd met him, Silas Maddox had nothing to say. 3 days later, Red Mesa looked like a different town. Water flowed through irrigation channels that hadn't seen moisture in years. Cisterns filled. Wells that had been declared dry began producing again, not from theft, but from the aquifer's natural flow, no longer being secretly siphoned. And at my well, the lithium deposits dried in the sun, glittering white and valuable and impossible to hide. The makeshift courthouse was packed for Silas Maddox's hearing. Judge Morrison had ridden in from the territorial capital, a granite-faced woman who'd built her reputation on being unmoved by money or threats. She reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who understood that justice delayed is justice denied. The documents Clara had helped us steal were damning. The original contracts showing fraud, the engineering plans with their emergency collapse procedures, the kill list with Thomas's name and 7 others, each marked completed or in progress. I testified first, laying out the timeline of discovery, the engineering evidence, the proof of systematic theft. My voice stayed steady, even when I described Thomas's last journal entry. Even when I showed the court the tin tag stamped with the syndicate's mark, Abigail testified to the scientific findings, the lithium content, the brine analysis, the proof that the dry aquifer was anything but. Then Rafe took the stand. He was pale from blood loss, bandaged, but clear-eyed in a way I'd never seen before. "I enabled this," he said without preamble. "I knew the syndicate's operations weren't entirely legal. I told myself it was necessary. That order mattered more than truth. I was wrong." He looked directly at Silas, "and I'll spend the rest of my career making that right." Clara was the last witness. She surrendered her father's private ledgers, the ones that showed exactly where the stolen water and minerals had gone, how much had been sold, how much profit had been hidden. She renounced any claim to her father's fortune, requesting it be held in trust for the families of those he'd harmed. When she finished, Silas looked at her, not with rage, with emptiness, as if his daughter had ceased to exist the moment she chose truth over loyalty. Judge Morrison's verdict was swift. "The evidence is overwhelming. Silas Maddox, you are found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud in securing water rights, theft of territorial resources, and destruction of public property. You will be remanded to the territorial prison pending sentencing." The judge then turned to the broader question of the aquifer and the lithium deposits. The Red Mesa Water Syndicate's claims are void. All water rights revert to territorial control, to be administered by a public cooperative. She looked at me. "Mrs. Winslow, your deed to the well site is valid. However, Given the significance of the lithium deposits and their connection to the public aquifer, I'm ordering the creation of a binding trust. You will retain extraction rights, but all proceeds beyond reasonable compensation must be invested in public infrastructure and environmental stewardship. I stood. Your Honor, I propose calling it the Juniper Cooperative, named for the Mustang who stood watch while I dug for truth. A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Approval, relief, the sound of people who'd been holding, their breath finally exhaling. That afternoon, we held the first meeting of the cooperative in Dr. Thorne's surgery, because the courthouse was being cleaned and we couldn't wait. Abigail had already drafted a public health charter for water quality testing and safe mineral extraction. Clara volunteered to handle the financial administration, creating transparent ledgers that would be open to public inspection, and Rafe, still bandaged but determined, offered to help establish water monitoring stations at every major well site. To make sure we never let this happen again, he said. I brought Thomas's last field notebook, the one he'd been carrying when he died. On the final page, in his precise handwriting, he'd written, "Flow belongs to those who steward it, not those who steal it. That's our mission statement," I said. We worked until dark, planning the infrastructure, the testing protocols, the distribution systems. When everyone finally left, I walked back to my well alone. The geysers had calmed to steady flows now, the pressure equalized. Water pooled in the hollows, reflecting stars. The lithium crust glittered along the stone collar like frost made of wealth. Juniper was there, drinking from a new trough we'd installed. She raised her head when I approached, water dripping from her muzzle. In the moonlight, her scars looked like silver medals. I knelt at the well's edge, my fingers trailing through the cold water. After 12 years of drought, after 6 months of grief, after weeks of danger, this moment felt almost ordinary. Water flowing where it should, truth visible in the light of day, but I knew this was just the beginning. The syndicate was broken, but greed doesn't die with one man's arrest. The aquifer was freed, but ecosystems take years to heal. The lithium would bring wealth, and wealth always brings new predators. I pulled out my surveying notebook and began documenting the flow rates, the mineral concentrations, the baseline data we'd need for proper stewardship. As I worked, I heard Thomas's voice in my head, not a ghost, just memory and method, the discipline he'd taught me made permanent. Measure twice. Cut never if it harms the water, I promise, I said aloud to the desert, to the stars, to Thomas, to myself. We'll measure twice and cut never if it harms the water. We'll keep this transparent. We'll share the wealth. We'll prove that knowledge can be more powerful than greed. The well didn't answer. It just continued flowing, patient and eternal, the way truth always does when you finally let it rise. In Red Mesa, the desert had learned to breathe again. And I, the widow who bought a dry well for 10 cents, had learned that sometimes the smallest investments yield the most valuable returns, not in money, in justice, in restoration, in the simple revolutionary act of letting water flow where it belongs. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.